joining us from. And welcome to another edition of the Digital Download.
Which is
It's the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live, now globally syndicated on the IBGN Internet Radio Network. Today we're discussing why clear messages win. We have a special guest, Ben Guttmann, to help us with the discussion. A sought-after speaker, thought leader, and college lecturer, Ben has founded and managed an award-winning marketing agency and shared the wisdom of his experience in his book, Simply Put, Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them. But before we let's try clear messaging. Before we bring Ben on, let's go around the set and introduce everyone. Tim.
Hello, everybody. My name's Tim Hughes. Welcome, everybody. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite, and I'm famous for writing the book, Social Selling Techniques to Influence Buyers and Changemakers.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Adam.
Hello, everybody. I'm Adam Gray. I'm Tim's business partner at DLA Ignite and also co-founder. I had two have written a couple of books, one of which without Tim, the other one with Tim. So I'm not famous for either of those, though, sadly.
All right. And myself, I am Rob Durant, founder of Flywheel Results. We help startups scale, and I am a proud DLA Ignite partner. But I've not written any books.
Yes.
Yet. Soon enough. As I said, this week on the Digital Download, we'll speak with Ben Guttmann. With an extensive background in marketing and education, Ben's approach simplifies communication while making it highly effective. Let's bring him on. Ben, good morning and welcome.
Morning, Ben. Ben, before we get started, I'm really sorry about this, but we need to bring Amanda Wild's comment up.
That's great.
Rob, would you do that for us? I'm just going to read out Amanda's comment, okay? And we will get to you in a moment, Ben. Amanda says, Tim's book on social selling is fantastic, highly recommended. Right, sorry about that, Ben. To you.
And Amanda, the check is in the mail.
Thanks, Amanda.
Good morning and welcome, Ben.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. And Amanda, great comment.
Thank you. Ben, I am so pleased that you're coming on, because messaging is it's like so key to everybody. I mean, if you think about it, we're in a situation where there's a kind of a downturn, but there kind of isn't. Mm-hmm. People are being laid off. And quite often the messaging is kind of the thing that gets blamed. Sorry, Rob. I know you've got a better introduction already, but I was kind of on a roll.
You absolutely are, and that's perfectly fine. I was just going to start with Ben. Why don't you start just by telling us a little bit more about yourself, how you got here, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Again, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. But so my background is I ran a marketing agency for 10 years. This was something that I started with a couple of friends kind of right out of college in an old professor's basement. Actually, it was I was the heads down as like the big student government nerd when I was in college there, and didn't really do a lot of the internship stuff. But thankfully, I had a professor that ran a marketing agency and came up to me and said, "Hey, I know you kind of want to maybe start your own stuff. We need some help with digital. Maybe we can figure something out." And so we hopped in my 94 Honda Accord, drove out of the city up to their office, slapped our logo on the wall, and we tried to figure it out, right? And so we worked with like the local ice cream shop to begin with, the local camera shop, and then bit by bit, we started to get more employees, bigger clients. We got an office, we moved, and then 10 years later, we're working with like the NFL and Comcast, and I Love New York, and these really great brands, and we about 2 years ago decided to sell it. So we sold the business, and it was a ton of fun. It was a great ride. I really enjoyed it. But one thing I say a lot is like, you can kind of take like the boy out of the marketing agency, but you can't take the marketing out of the boy, if that makes sense. Sure. So even after doing that experience, I would still have, the as I'm going around, as I'm teaching, as I'm consulting, as I'm speaking, I would still have the same question rattling around in my head, which was what clients would ask us to solve, which is, well, why do some messages work and others don't, right? Why are, how do we get people to move to action? How do we get something from out in our heads to somebody else's? And so that's what ultimately kind of led to writing the book, and to, and to the 208 pages later, that's what we have here.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I want to start off with a foundational question, but before we do that, I want to recognize some of the audience that's already spoken up to say hi. William Shorten has said, good afternoon, Rob, Tim, Adam, hi all. Hey, Will, good to hear from you again. We've heard from Francisca Harding. Proud of you, Ben Guttmann.
Well done, Ben.
And then we have Andrew Slesser. Good morning, afternoon, LinkedIn world. And we wave to Adam.
So what
Andrew.
happens, Ben, is that we wave to Andrew, and we do this every week.
Okay, this is the
and
thing.
he waves back, but we can't see him.
That's great.
All right. So thank you for indulging us for a moment, Ben. Let's start with a foundational question. What mistakes are people making with their messaging?
So this kind of goes to the foundational piece of the book, which is, so the first half of it is to say, well, why, why is this so hard to communicate? Why do we have a struggle here, and what works? And the second part is to how do we kind of get there, right? So what happens when you look at, if you break down all of communication, if it's marketing and you're building a campaign for a Super Bowl ad or whatever, or if it's kind of even a one-to-one communication, it all happens the same way. And so I break it down as to there's senders and there's receivers, right? And we're all kind of both, depending on what day it is or what moment it is. But when we're receivers, we want things in a certain way, and that senders are not really prepared to get there. We're not built for that. So it comes down to this idea of fluency. And this is a word that we know from our kind of daily life, right? You can be fluent in English or Spanish or Mandarin, or fluent in like cheese or wine. Where we're fluent, things are easy, right? It's easy to it actually comes from the word flowing. That's the original kind of Latin root of that. So that's what it feels like. But if you ask a cognitive scientist about the word fluency, what that means is, well, how easy is it for you to take something from out in the world, stick it in your head, and make sense of it, right? And so things that take less work, that are easier to perceive, that are easier to understand, well, we're more like, across a whole bunch of different metrics, we're more likely to like them, we're likely to trust them, we're likely to buy them. All the things that we want most of the time when we're doing marketing, right? And on the flip side of it, when things aren't fluent, when they take a lot of work, when they take kind of more brain cycles, they make us sweat a little more, we don't like them, we don't buy them, we don't trust them, all the things that we don't want. So we want fluency, but the problem, to get to the answer of your question, Rob, is that when we're in the sender position, we have a really hard time getting there. That's not our default path. We're pulled towards more. We have an additive bias, a complexity bias in our own brains, and then externally, we are pushed in that direction as well, because you need more lines for the resume, you need more bullets on the press release, you need more pages on the website, and you need your photo in the paper. All of those things push us in the direction which causes this kind of gulf here. And that's what we're trying to solve when we look at simplicity.
So if I heard you correct,
that makes perfect sense. Absolutely perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
So given that is so simple, and it is simple, let's be honest, I'm trying to convince you of something. So the simpler the language that I use, and the more basic that language, and the more straightforward that language, the more likely you are to walk towards me rather than back away from me, because I'm not scaring you. So why does everybody get this wrong? Because when we look at outreach, and we look at advertising, and we look at websites, it's absolute. All of these things are produced and written and created from the standpoint that you know every bit as much about my product as I do. Therefore, I can just vomit this constant stream of stuff at you, and you'll go, "Oh, that makes perfect sense." When of course it doesn't.
Oh, I think that's the biggest problem, right? So we think that everything we do matters as much to other people as it matters to us, right? This is like the biggest crime in marketing, and this I've noticed this years ago when I was kind of first starting my agency, and I had like lunch with a friend who was also in marketing, and they were so excited telling me about this campaign they were doing, this and that, and I'm saying, well, everything is in my favor for caring about this. It's my friend, it's the industry I work in, I should care about this, but it was also terminally boring, right? Like to hear that we don't necessarily care about most of the stuff that kind of hits our brains, right? We have some fundamental motivations; those ladder up to other things that we want and need. But for the most part, we all woke up today with so many things we care about, right? We care about our friends and our family, our sports teams, our vacation coming up, our deadline, whatever it is, the leaky roof. We don't care about your like new brand of shampoo, right? It's just not something that we are paying as much attention to or want to pay as much attention to. Nobody woke up today saying, I have on my to-do list, I want to open some spam emails, I want to watch some TV advertisements, I want to click through some Instagram ads. It's just not on our to-do list. And we have a fundamental, we're kind of like, we're built to care a lot more about the thing that we care about and have a hard time extrapolating that experience to how others perceive that.
I think that, again, that makes sense, Ben. Nobody gets up in the morning and says they want to open a load of spam emails. And you're right. I think whenever we sit down and actually try and write something from a marketing perspective, it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the other thing that happens, and this this kind of comes, this kind of ties in as one of the little like tips for later on too. And a lot of times we think that we're talking to a mass audience, right? We're think that, oh, that's a funny joke.
So so people know, Andrew has made the comment that 50% of the people on this show don't need to worry about shampoo.
Thanks, Andrew.
That's great.
That's not funny, Andrew. I'm sorry. You're banned.
Well, Andrew is one of our club, in fairness.
That's fantastic. But what was I saying? So one thing that happens a lot is that we think that we're talking to a mass audience, but we really aren't actually ever talking to a mass audience. We're talking individually one time, many, many times. There's really no such thing as a crowd in many ways, because at the point of the interaction, it's just me hearing whatever it is that you're saying. So that also helps push us in this place where we're kind of struggling with the language that we're using and the tone that we have.
Will shares with us, I always come back to the quote from Thomas Edison. I'm sorry, Thomas Erickson. Communication is always done on the listener's terms.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's at the crux of what you were saying there, Ben.
I think so too. So if there's like one fundamental piece that I always like to highlight as the takeaway, it is just as if you're sending a letter in the mail, you're responsible for the postage. You are responsible as a sender of an advertisement, of an email, of a proposal, whatever. You're responsible for the literal and metaphorical cost of that communication. It's your responsibility, not theirs.
So this is a really interesting thing, because I hate advertising. I used to be in advertising. I hate advertising. No. Tim hates advertising. Rob is less partisan about it, but he's still not a fan of advertising. But the fact remains, sometimes we see an ad and it's really speaking to us. It's really well targeted. And I say ad, but it could be an email or a banner or whatever. And it's really speaking to us at exactly the moment that we desire that thing, or that catches our eye. And, that could be a pair of training shoes on Instagram, or it could be a new car, or whatever it is that is in your mind at that moment. And none of us would mind advertising if advertising was always like that. What I see is adverts for dog biscuits and chairs for disabled people, that are old and have trouble getting out of the sofa when they've watched TV for half an hour. And so those are of no interest to me, and that lowers my threshold for tolerating advertising. Whereas if somebody says, "Here's a fantastic new sports car," okay, you had me at sports car, and so why is it that marketers behave so badly? I think Seth Godin peaked this argument when he said the problem with marketers is that they break everything. You find this mechanism, like email, you find this mechanism for removing the cost of distribution of your message. So rather than saying, well, I'm going to use this to speak to you, Ben, and I'm going to use it to speak to you instantaneously, I say, well, I'll use this to speak to everyone because it's free. I can send 1 million emails for the same price as 100. So why wouldn't I do that? And this laziness really alienates the audience, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Before you answer that, Ben, I just want to speak up. Yesterday in my introduction to marketing class, this was the exact discussion that I posed to the students. So I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about it.
I mean, it's a great observation. So when you look at what the kind of net favorability is of different industries in the United States, there's a survey that I pull up and I show it in one of my classes every semester, which is says, okay, what is the most net positive, most liked industry and trusted industry in America, and what's kind of the worst one, right? And the ones, I'm going to butcher exactly where they are, but the ones towards the bottom, you have some of the things like people don't like airlines, right? Like people don't like, sometimes people don't like government agencies. People don't like lawyers. And then right there is advertising. It's one of I think it's in the chart that I usually pull up. It's the third or fourth lowest one is in terms of advertising.
This is the Edelman Trust Report. I'm guessing you're quoting, Ben.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
There's a trust report created by an advertising agency called Edelman, isn't it? Which is which measures trust, and it does it on a yearly basis.
Yeah, and so I use that to lead into a discussion in my class about marketing ethics, which is saying, I think marketing is actually a neutral field, just like a lot of things out there, but it's the connection between producers and consumers, right? Like that's the fundamental definition of marketing. How do you get something from people that make stuff to the people that want and need that stuff? In the process of kind of going through that, I talk about the ethics of saying there's a lot of ways to do this wrong, right? There's a lot of ways to do this where you're dividing people, or a lot of ways to this where you're manipulating people. And there's really no firm guide rails against that, except for your own individual kind of ethical code. And at a certain point, kind of the efficacy of it, right? So I added that to my class a couple of years ago. And I always kind of emphasize that as much as possible, because it's really what you make of it. And then just the other thing that came to mind as you were talking about that, I mean, the most famous quote about advertising, I think it's from a retailer named Wanamaker in the 1800s. He said, half of all advertising, is half of all the money I spend on advertising is wasted. I just don't know which half, right? And that's the problem. So a lot of the stuff that we do, even today, in an era where attribution is easier than it's ever been, it's still a lot of just kind of spray and pray, right? We're gonna put 1 million things out there, and hopefully, some of it sticks to who is relevant for. And so I think that is something that when I look at one of the reasons I wrote the book, and at the moment I did, was the stuff that was really effective in the last few years was hyper targeted stuff that was really, really just incessant, kind of beating you over the head with stuff. But that era is ending in many ways with the death of the cookie. So how do we kind of revert back to more savvy and articulate and meaningful forms of messaging? And that's kind of what pushed me also to do this project.
Andrew poses an interesting question. Is this down to marketing teams trying to be original and different, but missing the message they're trying to get across?
Oh boy. So this is one thing that I have, I've kind of, if you had to summarize everything, a little vendetta with the book, is that there's a lot of times where there are pretty words, but it's not an effective message. And this happens all the time in marketing. If you mentioned homepage, like websites before, so many websites, you can go to them and it's just these very pretty words, right? It's very like, oh, this is a really, snazzy sentence that I have there, but it doesn't actually mean anything. And as marketing agencies and copywriters are really good a lot of times at coming up with pretty words. And sometimes the pretty words are meaningful, like they actually do connect. But a lot of times it's just, okay, this sounds like a really nice thing to put on a billboard, instead of it being something that actually means anything or actually connects with what the audience's needs and motivations are.
So I need prettier words? Can ChatGPT help me with that?
So it's funny you mentioned ChatGPT. I had a friend who, he has a podcast and he's an author also, and he took my book. He took the kind of the second half of the book, the design lessons in it, and he built a GPT, like a custom AI piece around it, and he used that and now he's been using that to improve his emails, and his email click rate went 40 or 50% higher from before to when he did a test from the before to the after on it. So that was pretty cool.
Wow. So
Yeah.
what advice do you have for someone looking to improve their communication skills?
Oh yeah. So I'll use that as kind of the bridge to get into so how do we bridge that gap, right? How do we go between where the receivers are and where the senders are? And really, receivers aren't going anywhere. You got to move the senders over to them. So there's 5 design principles that I've identified that help us get there. And this is not a checklist. It's not kind of a play-by-play piece, but it's more of, more kind of general principles that the more we can activate on them, the better we're going to be. So the first one is your message beneficial? What does it matter to the receiver? This is kind of marketing 101, sales 101, like features versus benefits type stuff. The second one is focused. Are you trying to say one thing, or are you trying to say multiple things at once? Is it one idea, or is it 3 ideas in a trench coat? The third one is salient. Does your message stand out from the noise? Is it noticeable? Does it come to your attention? Is there contrast? The fourth one is empathetic. Are you speaking in a language that the audience understands? Are you meeting them where they are in terms of both the language, but their emotions, their motivations? And then finally, minimal. Have you cut out everything that you don't need and kept only what is important? And this does not necessarily mean the fewest number of words or characters or pages, but it means the least amount of friction, right? That's what we're really optimizing for, is to make it as easy and fluent as possible.
So how do you measure the success of messaging?
Well, does it do what you want it to do, right? I mean, that's there's lots of ways in marketing is especially vulnerable to this, but a lot of times we measure we measure kind of the pennies, but not the pounds a little bit, right? We'll go and we'll say, well, how many likes did this post get, or how many shares did it get? And that's all nice, but did it sell more widgets, right? Like, did it get more votes? Did it get more donations? That's ultimately what you're looking for.
That's so hard. That's a major discussion going on in marketing these days. You earlier referenced attribution and being able to tie that like or that share or that click back, that nickel of ad spend to that dollar of revenue.
You also talked about your friend's click rate on his email going up, but you didn't say how much additional revenue he got. It's
a good question. I should ask him about that. I should, but that's exactly. It's a hard thing to kind of tie together, and that is the fundamental problem. But what we're looking at with messaging
is it though a hard thing to tie together? And I think that this is the point, isn't it? People often want to set KPIs that they know they can deliver on and reflect well on them.
Yeah.
So I'm going to create a post that gets loads of impressions, and then I can say to Tim, look at this, I've got loads of impressions. And Tim will stand there with his arms folded and say, did you sell anything? And I go, well, no, I didn't actually sell anything, but loads of people saw the brand, and that's created this background noise in the industry. And, the number of times that I've been in meetings and I've shouted at agencies who have said exactly that. This creates a bit of background noise so people will recognize our brand in the marketplace. No, they won't. Just because you want it to be true, it doesn't make it true. Mm-hmm. There's no reason that they would remember your brand any more than they would remember anything else. They've got better things to focus on. So the only measure that counts is whatever are those important drivers of value. Now, it could be that it's sales. It could be that it's client retention. It could be that it's new business meetings. Whatever it is that is a concrete deliverable. Mm-hmm. But the other stuff is all just noise, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, I mean, largely, right? And it's. I think that's a really good way of putting it. I think that we're very easily kind of distracted by the thing about social media, which really was interesting. So when we started our agency 10 years ago or 12 years ago, it was kind of the beginning of a lot of this. It was at the first couple of years of a lot of like Facebook marketing taking shape and Twitter for a little bit. The interesting thing about it is there were more numbers thrown at at your face basically from social media than any other channel would give you. Now you can get more metrics from different things, but it's a lot of the numbers were also public, right? You can see how many likes were on something, how many comments on it. And I think that did push a lot of I think that did push a lot of brands and agencies to kind of focus on the wrong thing a lot of times, because that's what you could measure. And also that's what clients wanted. So those were like we used to call it, those are the vanity metrics, right? So what I really care about is how many people maybe signed up for my email list, right? Or how many people have purchased something in the last 30 days, whatever. I don't really care about how many Instagram followers are there. Like I shouldn't as a business. But one conversation that kept coming up when we dealt with clients was they wanted to see the Instagram number go up. They wanted to see the Facebook number go up, partially because their bosses could see those numbers. They could go on their own time and go see them in a way which, they're not going to pay attention to the detailed report that shows all the sales trends. So that's it was an interesting moment for sure.
But isn't one of the really interesting things about this that at some point, somebody else, you pass something on to somebody else normally. When you're trying to generate revenue, I'm responsible for creating your campaign. You're responsible for developing the conversation, and then you pass it on to Tim. And you're very reliant on the person that comes after you. So I do think that a lot of times certainly when we're advising clients, a lot of our job is to push the problem downstream in order that we can identify what it is. So typically for us, the challenge that many of our B2B clients have is that they're not having enough conversations. They can't sell anything in the B2B space really from an advert. So you have to have a conversation with someone. So we're not having enough conversations. And typically clients might say, well, we're not closing enough business. Mm-hmm. And our argument would be, well, you don't know if you're closing enough business because you're not having enough conversations. Because if you're only having one conversation a month, who knows if you can sell or not? It's very hit and miss. If you're having 1,000 conversations a month and you're only closing one of them, now you've got a problem. But you can see where the problem is. And I think a lot of time, it's likes are in and of themselves utterly valueless. But in the B2B space, they're incredibly powerful because if you've liked my post, I've got a reason now to have a conversation with you and I know who you are. Whereas if you're an impression of my post, you're just somebody that fits this particular criteria. Mm-hmm. And when I've had the conversation with you, okay, was there a next action? Was this a valueless conversation where we just said, hi, Ben, nice to meet you. It's really interesting to see you've got a Eames chair in the corner of your room. Or was it a conversation where the next action was, that's really interesting. I think you need to come in and talk to my boss about that. And I think that often people don't ask those difficult questions of themselves and of their business, do they? Because it requires you to say, actually, I need help with this element of it, whatever this element might be.
So that reminds me a little bit of that first principle here about benefits, right? And so this is something that, we if you're in marketing or you're in sales, is one of the things that's kind of beaten into your head pretty early on, or at least it should be, which is that people don't buy features, they buy benefits, right? They don't buy the thing, they buy how their life is better because of that thing. There's a sentence that I tell my students every semester, and I say, if you remember this, and you forget everything else in this class, everything else in this whole degree, you're going to be in better shape than most people in this industry. And it's not for me, it's from Theodore Levitt, a Harvard professor from the 60s. He said, people don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole, right? They don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. They don't want the thing, they want what the thing does for them. And that's, I think, the thing that's easiest to forget when you're talking about those sales conversations, when you're talking about any form of messaging, is that we often dwell in the features. The features are things that are accessible to our 5 senses, right? You can see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it, right? But the things that actually motivate us are usually several layers deeper than what those things are. And so if you're looking at a drill, to pull that example, well, it might have a comfort grip and an extended battery life or more torque or a flashlight. Those all are features. But the extra battery life is the thing that allows you to work longer. And then by working longer, you get more work, you get more jobs done, you make more money, maybe you get more satisfaction out of your home being fixed. All the, by interrogating it and going down a few layers, you get into a place that's much closer to why people make decisions.
Yeah, and I think that going down that several layers, so yes, you're not buying a 1/4-inch drill, you're buying a 1/4-inch hole. Well, actually, you're not buying a 1/4-inch hole because you don't want a 1/4-inch hole in the wall. What you want is the bookshelves to put on the wall. And actually, you don't really want the bookshelves on the wall. What you want is the books off the floor. And why do you want the books off the floor? Because your wife tells you do. and whatever those different layers are. And I think getting to the bottom of those and understanding the root cause of the problem and the driver is very often overlooked, isn't it? As you said, because it's intangible. I can see the comfortable grip and the extended battery. I can't see the fact that my wife is smiling now.
But that's the challenge, isn't it, Adam? I can't see that your wife is smiling.
Yeah, well,
I don't even know that that's your problem. But I think your problem is you need a hole in the wall. Or I think your problem is you need the drill. I only talk to you about the things that I know rather than the things that I could try and figure out.
What I use as an example a lot of times. So the tool to get there, the tool to get from that feature to what the kind of motivation piece is the word "so what." It's a very simple question. It's just so what? And if you take that and you interrogate the feature a couple layers down, you can eventually get to something interesting. So as an example, I always like to talk about mint toothpaste, mint flavor in your toothpaste. That is a feature. It has this flavor, you can taste it. There you go. But I don't really want mint toothpaste. What I want is, well, so what about mint toothpaste? I want fresh breath. Okay, well, there we go. That's getting a little bit closer. I like to call that the functional benefit, that first level. This is tangible. It still kind of exists in the real world, but it's the outcome of that feature. But do I really even want fresh breath? Well, what's the benefit of that? So what? Well, if I have fresh breath, that means that I'll have a more successful date tonight, right? And okay, well, that's getting a little bit closer to actually why you want to have mint flavor to begin with. And that we'll call the emotional benefit, that second layer, which starts to be more in tune with your actual motivations. But if you want to go one more time, that's where the magic starts to happen. You say, okay, well, why do you want to have this successful date? So what? Okay, well, that ties into what you've probably seen in a psychology textbook, a million times, which is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? What are the fundamental motivations that are driving me for that? And so what about having a successful date? Maybe it's love and belonging, maybe it's physiological needs. And so you can get all the way down from mint flavor in your toothpaste to that fundamental level. And once you do that, you can basically kind of turn around and say, okay, well, I'm going to invest proportionally in my messaging at each one of those levels. And it depends on your audience and the circumstance. But for a broadcast advertisement, you say, okay, well, I'm going to start with the emotional benefit, then move to the functional, and then move to the features. And a lot of times people go from the outside in instead of the inside out for that.
We have some comments from the audience. We have Jody Stabe says, I love milk and dairy products. However, my favorite marketing at the moment is Oatly. They're straightforward and funny.
My favorite is the Cadbury's ads at the moment.
The Cadbury's? Yeah. And Robert Caruso says, what's in it for them is missed in many brand messages today. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
One thing just on that Oatly piece that's interesting. So when I talk about salience, it's about how do you stand out from the noise, right? How do you contrast with everything else that's in the environment? Oatly is an interesting example of one of the reasons why I think, but one of the ways, the best way to get there to salience is by embracing constraints. It's by saying, I'm going to follow different rules than everybody else is. So I'm going to end up with a different outcome than I would have otherwise. And the constraints can come in a lot of different ways. You can limit your time or your space. Oatly, at least in the US, was couldn't call themselves milk. If I recall correctly, they couldn't call themselves milk because they're not milk, and there was a whole big lobbying thing and whatnot. And so they've been really fascinating about how they've kind of turned that on their head in terms of saying, well, it's not milk, it's Oatly, it's different. And like they're using that as kind of the forcing mechanism, the pressure to do more creative advertising, a lot of stuff they're doing. So I see their stuff all around the city here.
One of the things about Oatly, which is really interesting, is that it was a marginal product. And what they've been able to do is actually bring it into the mainstream. I went into Starbucks the other day and I said, do you actually sell coffee with cow's milk anymore? And they said, no, not really.
Wow. Yeah.
It's the exception rather than the rule, whereas 5 years ago, it would have been the rule rather than the exception.
So let's dig into that a little bit more. What are the biggest challenges in creating clear, impactful messages in a crowded market?
Yeah. Well, I think that, talk about the crowded market for a second. The average American spends about 13 hours a day consuming some form of media, right? It's a lot of time, right? It's a lot of stuff. That's thousands and thousands of things being blasted at your brain constantly. And in those thousands, there's a lot of things that just don't matter to you, the things that get missed. And so you're competing pretty heavily in that environment. So that's number one. I think what happens a lot of times is we end up, we only really notice contrast. This is true, like in our senses. We don't notice things that don't stand out from the background. We sometimes our eyes don't even pick them up, or obviously we've all probably squinted at a blurrily shot TV show or something, and we can't really make somebody out. We only notice contrast. But what's also interesting is we heavily prefer things that are high contrast often. When you look at some of those studies about fluency, a number of them have looked at, well, okay, how do we rate the beauty or the aesthetic of an image that has higher contrast against the background? And so when they put kind of the figure against a blurry background or something that doesn't form that much contrast, the image wasn't rated as being as beautiful or as being as high quality necessarily. When you increase the contrast, well, now all of a sudden the ratings improved about the positive nature of it. Same things have happened when you look at text and being blurry versus not blurry. So that happens all the time. And what we're looking for is how do we create the contrast amongst those kind of 13 hours of noise that we get there? How do you create the signal as part of it? I mentioned the constraints. I think that's the biggest piece. I think you can look at constraints as a limit and say, well, okay, this is this feels opposite of what I'm trying to do here. But oftentimes it's the thing that we need to kind of push us out of the rut, right? The creative rut that gets formed by doing the same thing over and over. And one interesting angle on this that I always like to mention is constraints can be upper bounds, but they can also be lower bounds. So one creative tool that I've always been fascinated by, and I've seen really wonderful effects of, is you're trying to develop a new brand name or a new slogan for something, or design like a new banner ad for whatever. Well, instead of saying I have to do 10 of them, and that's what it's going to be, that's the minimum I have to hit is 10 of them. Say, well, sorry, the maximum is I got to do 10. Set a minimum. Say I'm gonna have to do 100 of them, because what's going to happen is after the first dozen or so, you're going to run out of the easy stuff. And then you're going to get into this really interesting, weird space where you're trying to stretch, and then you get into this other funk, and you get high and you get low, and by the end of it, you're in a totally different territory of if it's visual design, if it's message, whatever it's going to be, than you were before, and that's where sometimes the magic is.
I love your point about the fact that it's contrast, but I think that often we see contrast as being something which is a visual thing, which it is. It's one of our stronger senses, but that contrast provides a degree of standout and uniqueness in everything. The little sound bites that you get with McDonald's or Intel or whatever, and even with copywriting, And I think that you know, often people miss obvious ways of doing things. So I'm a big fan of the works of Raymond Chandler, and you know how he introduces different lengths in sentences. So it was cold, it was dark, it was wet. The click clack of my shoes as I walked down the empty street, resonating off the walls of the buildings around. You know, so he's gone from short sound bites to all of a sudden something which is much longer. And I find this whole kind of standing out and doing something unexpected really interesting and a good way to differentiate.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. It's we only notice things that are different, right? Like that is the biggest across a bunch of different. And you can notice this too if you go, you know, if you know, you mentioned the visual nature of it being obviously important, but the auditory nature happens too, right? If you're I live here in New York City. If I hear a truck going by, it's no big deal. It's just a thing that happens. The fire truck going by, or the sirens blaring, same thing. That happens all the time. We also have a place up in the Catskills in the mountains just north of New York City, much quieter. If I am there and I hear the same truck going by, it is so much louder. It is so much different because the background is different, and so that creates this salience that, you know, is the type of thing we're often looking for when we're doing messaging otherwise.
We have a comment from Jonathan Smith. Afternoon, gents. Anyone believe or experienced marketing agencies or individuals using their client businesses as an opportunity to showcase their own skill set? For example, being over flamboyant in imagery, video, content, as opposed to providing their client with what their customers need to receive? If so, how would you advise business owners not to fall for such companies?
Interesting.
Sounds like Jonathan's probably had a bad experience with somebody at some point, and you know, and it's not particularly uncommon, to be, you know, unfortunately honest about it. One thing I'll tell you from my background's in design, and one thing that just absolutely irks me about designers, especially in the beginning of their career before they start to kind of mature into the industry, into working with clients, is they often think that well, there's two things. Number one is they think that it's art, right? And I love art. Art is great. I'm a patron. I go to the arts. My artist, my family. It's wonderful. Design uses some of the same skills as art, but it is not art. Design is business. Design is about solving a problem. Design is about arranging things in the world to achieve a goal. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's amazing amounts of creativity that goes into that, but it's not about your self-expression. It's not about your emotions. It's not about your relationship with your family or whatever it is. It's not about that. It's about, you know, there's things in the world that have to be arranged, if it's visually, if it's mechanically, if it's, you know, whatever, to achieve some sort of goal. And I think that a lot of people forget that, because a lot of times you go from like art school maybe into design, and that ends up kind of putting you in the framework, which causes you to have a lot of stress as a designer, because every time you get feedback from a client, you're like, oh my God, this is like a personal attack on me. I can't handle this. And you also then don't do great work. The agency suffers, the client suffers. It's a whole nightmare. So that's one thing. A lot of times, you know, after a couple of years, folks start to get a little more comfortable with saying, okay, this is how I get feedback and whatnot. But the other thing is related to feedback sometimes, which I have seen folks in the design field. I've seen folks also in copywriting and visual and motion and everything do the same thing, where they will say, oh, the client gave such like annoying feedback, or the feedback was, you know, I didn't understand what they were saying about this or that. And I always say, it's like, it's your job to get it out of them. It's not their job necessarily to give you the feedback, you know, in exactly your language. You do this all the time. You're the expert. You're the designer. You're the animator. You're the writer. You do this all the time. They only hire a designer, animator, developer, whatever. They only hire that once every year or 5 years or whatever it is, depending on their ability. They don't know this stuff. And so I've seen a lot of folks being like, oh my God, I can't get it. I don't understand what they're really being annoying. But on the other side, you know, it's your responsibility to to be the professional in that circumstance. And that'll come across people when somebody says like, oh, make it pop. That's always the joke. If you talk to designers, clients will go out and say, oh, make it pop. And they say, what does it mean to make it pop? I'm like, don't kid me. You know what it means to make it pop. Like, you know what it means. You know what I mean? You want more contrast. It wants more, maybe motion, maybe a little more energy. Maybe, you know, that's kind of your job is to translate what their feelings and reactions are to something into something that accomplishes the goal. That's the mark of a true professional.
It is, but it's interesting that you say that, because I think that one of the other jobs of the marketing agency, any creative part of the business world, their job is to fulfill the brief, not to make you happy. So, you know, it's like, you want me to write you a piece of music. What's the best band in the world? And you say, well, the best band in the world is the Rolling Stones. And I say, well, no, it isn't. It's the Beatles. And actually, this is not about me fulfilling your requirement for something you like. It's about fulfilling something which is on brief, which should deliver the outcome that you want to get. And I think that this idea that the client is always right is often, further to your point, is often totally wrong. The client isn't, because it's not their job. Their job is making widgets. Your job is selling this stuff. The client is always wrong, often, because they've got a very different frame of reference about what works and what doesn't. Well, I don't like that. Well, I don't care if you like it or not. This is the best thing.
I love that. So that is something exactly. I've used that exact sentence a million times, which I tell clients, listen, I don't care if you like it. Like we ban the word like from the first reaction, from the first meeting when we present something, because it doesn't really, if it does the other stuff, if it sells more widgets, if it builds your brand, if it is,
it's good.
You know, if it's ethical and it's legal and it's, you know, understandable and it's compactable, all the different kind of metrics, those are all we're looking at. If you do those right, you're going to like it. Like, I don't care about, you know, it being your favorite color. I don't care about it having a picture of your dog on it, whatever it is. I care that it accomplishes the goal which we set out to do.
So are there any daily practices or habits that you can suggest to help me improve my communication skills?
Well, I think, you know, you know, go by the book, number one. And then in there, kind of there's the 5 principles for it. And in each one of those, there are a number kind of tools that help us get there. And so, you know, I try to not be as prescriptive of it being kind of like a 1, 2, 3 type of thing, because it is more about kind of, again, the principles of it. That being said, I'll give you a couple. So the first one I mentioned a little bit was I mentioned kind of the speaking to the masses versus speaking to an individual. Perhaps the most effective, like, quick change that you can make is to say, I'm going to, you know, every time you're writing an email, it doesn't matter if it's going out to 100,000 people, you're writing it to one person. Every time you're making a social media post, you're making it for one person. If you're writing copy for, you know, someone's giving a speech or whatever, it's to one person. It's not to the masses. And the more effective you are at doing that, at putting yourself in the headspace of saying, well, this is not a one-to-many, this is a one-to-one, you become immediately more effective in your communication. You know who's the best person in the world at this right now, by the way, is Taylor Swift. She is able to get up on stage in front of 70,000 people and make each person feel like she's talking just to them in both the lyrics and in, like, kind of the banter. And then she's able to translate that across time and space with the movie and everything else. And so if you just want to,
I thought she was talking to me, Ben.
Yeah, absolutely.
She talks to me.
She was. I was having dinner with her the other night, and she said,
right, yeah.
That song I wrote for Tim.
Yeah. That's a big one. That's a big one. If you could do that. And the other example, by the way, the other person who was very famous about this a couple of decades ago is Bill Clinton. He always had a lot of people always spoke about it. It doesn't matter, you know, who he was speaking to. It made him feel like it was just one-to-one. And so a cheat code to do this is, like, take a Post-it note and, like, stick it on the side of your monitor and, you know, write and put a little stick figure on it and be like, that's who I'm writing this email to, is that person. So that's number one. And the second thing that I'll say is, this is more of kind of a tool, is interrogate your ands. So the word "and" is this weird word that allows a lot of things that may not be necessarily related to go together. And so if you take these "ands," you can put idea A, B, and C together into one thing, and it doesn't raise any kind of like red flags in your mind, right? It just passes through and says, "Oh, that's a correct, proper English sentence," and I move on. And if you replace it, at least as you're developing something to test it, replace it with the word "so." Well, you can see, well, does X flow into Y? Is it one coherent thought? That is, you can also use words "because" or "however." Those also work. But the word "so" is the easiest swap. Replace the word "and" with the word "so," and see, does your message still work then? If it doesn't, you have some restructuring to do.
Yeah, I remember that famous Steve Jobs speech when he went back to Apple after he was ousted and came back, and he said about how everyone out there is busy and they've only got a limited amount of time, and you've got to be very clear about what you tell them. And I think that's the crux of it, isn't it? It's about making sure that no matter how inexperienced they are in your field or how busy they are, they can't misunderstand what you're about to say to them.
Mm-hmm.
So Ben, remind us what your book is called. Could you hold this up?
Yeah. So my book is called "Simply Put: Why Clear Messages Win and How to Design Them." It came out a couple months ago from Barry.
And where can people get that?
Yeah, so you can grab it basically anywhere books are sold. But if you go to my website, benguttmann.com, it's not a good name for radio. So it's 2 T's and 2 N's. If you go to that, you can grab a copy of the book. There's all the links there. There's a free chapter you can go download. Go ahead and grab that. Also, I send out an email every Tuesday with more information.
And you said there was 5 design principles, didn't you?
Yep.
Which was beneficial, focused, does it so it stand out, empathetic, and I didn't get the 5th one.
So yeah, beneficial, focused, salient, empathetic, and minimal.
Minimal. Fantastic. Good summary.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. It's been a ton of fun. And please feel free to reach out, LinkedIn, email. I'm always happy to chat.
Excellent. Ben, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
You.
And one more time, if people wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, and you go to the website. All my contact info is there. Email's great. LinkedIn is great. Those are the primary channels for me.
Excellent. So this has been another edition of the Digital Download. We now have a newsletter. If you want to get highlights from this episode, beyond the show, insights, and reminders of upcoming episodes, you can scan the QR code on screen, or you can visit us at digitaldownload.live/newsletter. Ben, on behalf of myself, Tim, Adam, thank you so much. To the audience that has been a very active participant in today's show, on behalf of all of us here at the Digital Download, we want to thank you as well. Until next time, have a good week, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.